Welcome to True Echo, where stories hit harder because they echo real life. In a world full of headlines, we bring you the moments that matter most. These are the stories they almost silenced, the truths that shook the room, and the voices that dared to speak. Today we share the true tale of power, identity, and a moment that sparked a movement, all because one woman refused to be erased. My name is Danielle Monroe. I'm 38 years old. And last Friday, a pilot tried to stop me from boarding my own jet. It was just after 9 a.m. in Miami, and the air was already thick with heat, Florida heat, the kind that clings to your skin and doesn't let go. I stepped out of a black SUV in a navy blue suit I'd worn for the final keynote of the Women Who Build conference. 3 days of mentorship, investment pitches, and panels on leadership had left me physically drained, but professionally recharged. I'd stood on stages, shook hands with women launching startups from nothing but grit and passion, and watched them light up as they shared ideas that could one day change the world. It was my favorite part of what I do. And now, all I wanted was to get home to Birmingham, kick off my heels, and eat something that didn't come from a catering tray. I approached my jet with confidence. Not arrogance, confidence. The kind that comes from building something from scratch, from bootstrapping a company called Vector Hive that went from a 3-person team in a garage to a nationally recognized data analytics firm in under 7 years. My assistant Simone had filed the flight plan. Weather was clear. Snacks on board. Only change? A new pilot. The usual guy had called out. No big deal. Or so I thought. I reached the base of the stairs, heels clicking against the tarmac like punctuation. The pilot stood partway down, clipboard in hand, sunglasses hiding his eyes. "This flight is reserved for Ms. Danielle Monroe," he said. Not a question. A statement. And not a friendly one either. More like a preemptive challenge. "I'm Danielle Monroe," I replied, offering a smile. What I got in return was a smirk. Not cruel, not overt, but patronizing. He looked me over like I'd just told him I was the Queen of England. "There must be a mistake," he said, shaking his head. "The jet is reserved for Ms. Monroe." I blinked. "Yes," I said again. "That's me. Founder of Vector Hive. This jet is under contract to my company." Still he didn't move. Didn't budge. "We've had issues with impersonators before," he said, waving off my words like they were static. "Let me verify with corporate. Now, I've faced subtle prejudice before. In meetings when people assumed I was the assistant. At dinners when the waiter brought the bill to my junior associate. I'm not new to this. But being told to my face that I didn't look like someone who could possibly own a jet? That was new. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I pulled out my ID. I showed the digital receipt. I even pulled up a photo of me on this very jet from 2 weeks ago. The tail number ended in DMO, my initials. But nothing worked. Not the facts. Not the proof. Not even the sheer absurdity of the situation. "You understand," he said, "it's just protocol." No. What it was disbelief wrapped in civility. I called Simone. "We've got a situation," I said. That's when things spiraled, fast. She promised to get Charter Direct on the phone. Meanwhile, the pilot radioed someone inside, never once looking me in the eye. Soon, a ground operations manager appeared. Older, gray at the temples, another clipboard. More hushed conversations. More refusal to speak directly to me. That's when I realized, they weren't trying to fix anything. They were trying to wait me out. Hoping I'd back off, get frustrated, give up. But I don't do that. I stood there on the tarmac, under the rising sun, in my tailored suit and heels, watching a white woman in yoga pants stroll right through the terminal without even showing a boarding pass. No clipboard. No question. So I asked the question that had been burning in my throat. If I were a white guy in a golf shirt and boat shoes, I said, would we be having this conversation? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because the truth wasn't in what they said, it was in what they didn't say. And that silence said everything. The sun had climbed higher by the time Simone called me back, her voice tight but calm. "Charter Direct's head of operations is on it. CEO wants to speak with you directly in the next 2 minutes. Don't move." I didn't. Instead, I tilted my phone just enough so the men in front of me could hear. "My assistant is on the phone with your bosses," I said, steady as glass. "And the only thing you should be verifying right now is how fast you can apologize." Before they could respond, a silver sedan pulled up behind me. The door opened and out stepped a woman I hadn't seen in over a year, but I knew her walk before I saw her face. Rhea Kinley. Regional Flight Liaison for Charter Direct. Fierce, precise, no nonsense. She wore a sharp maroon suit, her heels low but deliberate. She didn't bother with small talk. She walked straight toward the jet like she owned the sky. The pilot stepped forward, still blocking the stairs like some gatekeeper to Olympus. "Can I help you?" he asked, squinting. "I'm Rhea Kinley," she said, not breaking stride. "I'm with corporate. You must be the new pilot." "Yes, ma'am." Kessler. "First week on the Monroe route." Rhea barely blinked. "Well, congratulations. We'll talk about your future shortly." Then she turned to me. "Ms. Monroe, I'm so sorry. This should never have happened." I didn't answer yet. I was waiting. Waiting to see if this man, this Kessler, was going to try and spin it, wriggle out, clean it up. He did. "I was just trying to follow protocol," he said quickly. She didn't have. She had everything, Rhea cut in, her voice like a gavel. Her ID. Her digital contract. Her receipt. And if you had followed your onboarding, you would have scanned the QR on her phone and matched it with the manifest. Instant verification. But instead you made a judgment. One not based in fact. Kessler flushed. "I was trying to avoid a security breach." "She's the one who paid for the jet," Rhea snapped. He tried again. "It's not about race." I stepped forward. "Then what was it about?" "My height? My lipstick?" Silence. "You looked at a black woman in a navy suit," I continued, "with every document in order, and your brain short-circuited. Because your idea of success, of ownership, doesn't include someone who looks like me. And worse? You didn't even consider that it could be true." Rhea turned to him. "Leave your badge and credentials at the operations desk. HR will contact you." He blinked. "Wait, are you firing me?" "That's all I can tell you for now." He stood there like a statue, still processing that the world he thought he knew had just collapsed beneath him. I climbed the stairs. Each step felt heavier than the last, not with shame but with fury, with exhaustion, with all the years I'd spent being polite in the face of disbelief. This time I wasn't going to protect anyone's comfort. I stepped inside the jet. My jet. Cream leather seats. Black walnut trim. The interior I had designed myself, down to the tiniest brass nameplate near the cabin door that read, Monroe. Still, someone had tried to push me out of my own space. I sat down, buckled up, and did something I never do. I opened my camera app. I wasn't an influencer. I didn't go live. But today was different. "I'm sitting on my own jet," I said, voice even, eyes on the lens, after being told I wasn't me. After showing everything, ID, receipt, contract, and still being told, there must be a mistake. I paused. All because I didn't look like what they expected. I ended the recording. What I didn't expect was how fast the world would respond when I finally shared it. By the time we were halfway to Birmingham, my video had already traveled farther than we had. I hadn't even posted it publicly at first. Just uploaded it to my private account and shared the link in a group chat with other women in leadership, executives, founders, directors, people who understood, who had lived it in conference rooms and cocktail receptions, in interviews where they were talked over, and boardrooms where they were mistaken for interns. It took less than an hour before it had been reposted by 3 different women I'd mentored. Then a journalist from Dallas picked it up. Then an activist account I followed. Then a Hollywood actor. By the time we touched down, Danielle Monroe was trending. But even before the media storm, one moment mid-flight stood out more than anything else. I was sipping a glass of water, trying to shake off the adrenaline, when the flight attendant leaned in. "There's a call for you," she said quietly. "Secure line. Charter Direct CEO." I took the headset. "This is Danielle," I said, unsure of what to expect. The voice on the other end was calm, measured. "Ms. Monroe, this is Douglas Tran. I wanted to call personally and offer my deepest apology." There was no script in his voice. No corporate gloss. He sounded like a man who'd seen something he couldn't unsee. "I reviewed the footage myself," he said. "I also read the pilot's internal comms. It's clear you were profiled. We failed you, not just as a customer but as a human being." I stayed silent. I needed to know where this was going. "We've already made the decision to terminate the pilot. But I'm not calling about PR. I'm calling as a father." That surprised me. I straightened in my seat. "My daughter's 16, he continued. Half black, half Vietnamese. Last year she got stopped in a mall by security. They didn't believe she bought the dress she was wearing, even though she had the receipt in her bag. She came home in tears." My throat tightened. That hit different. "She didn't film it," he said. "She just said yes and walked away. And I keep thinking, what if she hadn't? What if someone had filmed it? Would it have made a difference?" His voice softened. "What you did mattered. You didn't stay quiet. And now the world can't either. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting his words sink in. I didn't plan to record anything, I said. I just couldn't let it slide. That man looked me in the eye and was so certain I couldn't be who I said I was. Tran didn't interrupt. And it's not just about me, I added. It's about what that kind of disbelief costs us. Every time we're forced to explain, to prove, to apologize for taking up space, we lose something. And the world loses too. He was quiet. Respectfully so. Then, I'd like to meet you in person. No press. No cameras. Just a conversation. You have my word. I didn't answer right away. But the truth was, I believed him. I'll think about it, I said. We exchanged a few final words. Professional. Direct. Human. Then I hung up and stared out the window, clouds drifting past like soft reminders that no one owns the sky. But down here? On the ground? That was another story. Back on my phone, messages were pouring in. Emails. Mentions. DMs. But one message stopped me cold. It was from a woman I'd never met, Turan Hole. It read, I watched your video from my car in the Target parking lot and cried. 2 months ago, a cop asked me why I was driving a Tesla. I had the title in the glove box. I didn't film it. I just said yes and drove off. I wish I had done what you did. Thank you for making me feel seen. I didn't know it then, but Taran's message would be the first of thousands. Each one holding a story just like mine. Some worse. Some quieter. But all real. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't alone. The next morning, I woke up to 2.6 million views. My video was only 45 seconds long. No yelling, no dramatic music, no confrontation. Just me, in a plain seat I paid for, explaining how I had to prove I was me. That was it. But somehow that soft truth hit harder than any rage ever could. The comments were overwhelming. People weren't just reacting, they were sharing. Their own stories. Their own disbeliefs. Their own silent humiliations. A black real estate agent locked out of a gated community where he was showing a house. Security thought he was lost. A Latina doctor in full scrubs asked if she was the nurse by another doctor. An Indian woman questioned in first class, asked if she was sitting in the wrong seat. Again. And again. Story after story. Thread after thread. All tied together by the same invisible thread. The disbelief that someone like us could belong in places like that. The internet didn't just react, it roared. But what I didn't expect was Charter Direct's response. 2 days later, they issued a public statement. But it wasn't the usual sugar-coated damage control. It was raw. Honest. Uncomfortable. We failed Danielle Monroe. Here's why that matters. That was the headline. No fluff. No hiding behind vague phrases. Inside, they admitted what few corporations ever do, that their protocols were built around visual assumptions. That implicit bias training for new hires had been optional. That the system didn't break, it just wasn't designed for someone like me. But what shook me most? They invited me to speak. Not in a press release. Not on a stage. But directly to their board. Not for PR, the email said. For policy. I agreed. 3 days later, I was on a flight to San Diego, the same travel suit neatly pressed in my carry-on. I didn't want to dress up for them. I wanted them to see the same woman they doubted. Unfiltered. Unchanged. The boardroom was glass-walled, cold with air conditioning and polite tension. 8 board members sat around a sleek table, most of them older, mostly men, all silent. I stood. I'm not here for a payout, I began. And I don't need a scholarship in my name. They shifted slightly. I'm here because I built something. And I got treated like a fraud. In front of my own jet. That should scare you. Not because of what it means for your brand, but for what it says about the way your people see black women in spaces we've earned. One man at the far end of the table opened his mouth, then thought better of it. Bias isn't always loud, I continued. Sometimes it's quiet. Civil, smiling. Wearing a pilot's uniform and holding a clipboard. Sometimes it's baked so deep into the system, you can't find it unless you want to see it. There was a pause. A heavy one. Then one board member finally spoke. Elijah Kim. He hadn't said a word until now. My wife is black, he said. She's been followed in stores. Once a neighbor asked if she was the help. I didn't really get how bad it felt until she stopped telling me when it happened. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. I nodded. This isn't about canceling people, I said. It's about accountability. Because if your system doesn't believe people like me belong, then people like me are forced to prove we do. Every single day. In every single room. They listened. Some nodded. Some just sat still. But by the end of that hour, they agreed, unanimously, to a top-down review of all hiring, onboarding, and verification systems. Not just a new training video. A new culture code. I didn't walk out of there with fanfare. But I walked out with something more powerful. Change in motion. The San Diego sun was bright and clean when I stepped outside that boardroom. There were no cameras, no interviews, no staged handshakes. Just my phone buzzing again and again, each notification a tiny echo of a world that had started to lean in and listen. I stood in the parking lot for a moment, letting the light warm my face. Then I did something I hadn't done in days. I ignored the buzz. For 48 hours I didn't open my email. I turned off notifications. I let the world keep spinning without me, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, I sat in silence. Back home in Birmingham, I watched my dog chase squirrels along the fence. I made myself a cup of ginger tea. I sat under a throw blanket and just breathed. But the world didn't stop talking. CNN had called. NBC wanted to sit down. A talk show offered to fly me to Los Angeles for a Women of Power week. I turned them all down. Not because I wasn't honored. Not because I didn't want the message to spread. But because I didn't want my face to become the face. I didn't want to be a symbol that people pointed to without understanding the weight behind the moment. Because the truth is, this wasn't about me. It was about us. It was about the woman who sent me a DM to say, when I introduced myself as my firm's CFO, the client looked at my male assistant instead and congratulated him. It was about the young black girl in Atlanta who emailed to say, your story made me believe I can own something one day too. It was about the 1,000 quiet stories that had gone unnoticed until someone pointed a camera at one moment, and suddenly the silence cracked. Later that week, my neighbor, a woman I'd barely spoken to, waved over the fence. I saw your video, she said. I showed it to my teenage son. He needed to see that. That stuck with me more than any media outlet. Because that's where change begins, not in the press cycle but in backyards. In dinner conversations. In car rides home from school. That night, Simone called. How you holding up? She asked. I laughed softly. Tired, but not sorry. You shouldn't be, she said. What you did, people are calling it brave. I shrugged, though she couldn't see it. It shouldn't have to be brave to board your own plane. There was a pause. You're right, Simone said. But we're not there yet. Then she added something that made my breath catch. You know, we always say representation matters. But what you did, that wasn't just representation. That was resistance. That was reclaiming space. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then, it shouldn't have to be resistance. I know. We sat in silence for a beat. Then I asked, did we ever hear from Rhea? Oh yeah, Simone said. She sent flowers. Handwritten note. Said you reminded her why she took the job in the first place. That made me smile. A real one this time. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But maybe something had started. And maybe it was mine to carry now. I opened my journal that night for the first time in months. Not the digital one on my tablet, the old leather-bound one Simone gifted me years ago when I closed our Series B funding. The pages were rough, unlined, imperfect. I ran my fingers over the empty paper like it might whisper back. And then I wrote. I didn't choose the moment. But I chose what to do with it. That, I think, was the most important part. Because if we're waiting for these moments to be convenient, to be comfortable, we'll wait forever. The truth rarely fits neatly into schedules or public relations calendars. Comes when it comes. And when it does, you either step forward or you step aside. The video hadn't stopped. It was still being shared, still reposted, still dissected on morning shows and news panels. But the stories being told now weren't mine alone. They were ours. A corporate lawyer from Chicago sent me a message. I've been mistaken for the paralegal more times than I can count, even by opposing counsel. Watching you stand your ground made me want to stop laughing it off. A teenager from New York wrote, I saved your video. I watch it before interviews now. You reminded me I'm allowed to take up space. And then came the message that pulled at something deeper. It was from Cedric, a man I didn't know living in Arizona. You didn't ask to be the example, he wrote, but thank you for becoming one anyway. I sat with that for a long time. Because he was right. I didn't want to be the example. I wanted to get on my plane. I wanted to go home. I wanted a glass of wine and my dog curled up at my feet. I wanted my ordinary life, undisturbed. But that's the thing about these stories, they don't knock politely. They crash through the front door and ask you, what are you going to do now that everyone's watching? I didn't ask for the spotlight. But I wasn't going to dim it either. Instead, I picked up my phone. Not to film. Not to post. Just to call someone who had been on my mind. I called Rhea. She answered on the second ring. "Ms. Monroe," she said. "I was hoping I'd hear from you." "I got your note," I said. "Thank you. It meant more than you know." "I meant every word," she said. "And I meant it when I said I'm sorry. That's not the kind of culture I want to help build." "Then let's build a better one," I said. She paused. "Are you suggesting?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But I know this. If companies keep apologizing without changing, it's just performance. You and I both know we can do better." Rhea's voice was quiet but certain. "Then I'm in." I didn't know what it would look like. Not yet. Maybe a task force. Maybe a board seat. Maybe something new entirely. But the idea had taken root. Something beyond a moment. Something that could last. And for the first time in this whole whirlwind, I realized this wasn't just about resisting the system. It was about rebuilding it. 1 week later, I stood in front of a classroom filled with young women from the Girls in Tech summer program. They were seated in mismatched folding chairs, notebooks open, eyes wide. Most were high schoolers. A few were in college. All of them had the same question, though no one had said it out loud yet. Could this happen to me too? So I told them the truth. Yes, and it probably will. Not because you're not brilliant. Not because you're not ready. But because someone out there has already decided what success looks like, and you won't be it. They didn't blink. They didn't squirm. They listened. But that's not the end of the story, I continued. That's just the moment you choose whether to shrink or to stand. A girl in the front row raised her hand. She wore a NASA hoodie and thick braids tied with blue yarn. "How do you not get angry?" she asked. "If that was me, I'd lose it." I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. "You can get angry," I said. "You should get angry. But you have to ask yourself, do you want to be right or do you want to be heard?" That hit. I saw it in her face. Because the truth is, we spend so much time trying not to be labeled angry, difficult, dramatic, that we forget to own our power, our presence. I told them about the jet, about the clipboard, about Kessler, about the moment I realized I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was standing in for every woman who's ever been told, "You don't belong here." Then I told them what happened next. Charter Direct had followed through. They'd announced a restructuring of their bias training program, this time with real accountability. I'd been offered a consulting role to help redesign their executive onboarding protocol. And more importantly, they agreed to a multi-year equity initiative, funded not for optics but for results. They didn't just want to apologize anymore. They wanted to understand. And that was the shift, the real twist in the story. Because the world didn't turn upside down when I got humiliated on a runway. It turned when I refused to let it end there. When I turned my pain into policy. When I told my story, and thousands of people saw their own reflection in it. Back home that evening, I sat on the porch with Simone. She brought over takeout, and we ate in silence as the sun dipped behind the trees. "You ever think about how fast it all happened?" she asked. I nodded. "Feels like a year packed into a week." She leaned back. "You know what gets me? You didn't scream. You didn't rant. You didn't curse him out." "I wanted to," I said, half laughing. "But I needed the story to be undeniable." Simone smiled. And it was. We watched the sky turn pink, then lavender, then deep blue. And somewhere between the stars and the shadows, I realized something. This wasn't just about me reclaiming a seat. It was about inviting others to sit beside me. So now I say this to you, whoever's reading, watching, listening. If you've ever been made to feel invisible, if you've ever been told to wait your turn, if you've ever been stopped at the gate to your own success, don't shrink. Say your name. Own your story. Take your space. Because the moment you do, someone else will remember they can too. And that's how the echo grows. Danielle Monroe's story wasn't just about boarding a plane. It was about boarding power. Her quiet defiance opened a door for thousands of others to walk through. And now it's your turn. If you've ever had to prove you belonged in a room you built, this story was for you. Subscribe to True Echo for more real stories that expose the silent injustices we often overlook. Share this video if it moved you. And leave a comment. When was the moment you had to reclaim your space? Because someone out there needs to hear your echo too.